His wife, Serafina, had just fired her on a vicious lie, and her final, cold command? Don't bring your filth into my kitchen. Zahara, without a word, obeyed. She sat on the cold stone, every drop of rain a hammer
Get out of my
blow of
house!
injustice.
And don't
Inside,
you ever come back!
the mansion was a fortress of glass and marble, insulated from the world. Outside, the storm was biblical. But high above, behind the safety of a $5 billion fortune, Sterling Aldridge saw something that wasn't supposed to happen in his perfect world. Huddled against the driving rain, shivering, was Zahara Hayes, his maid. She wasn't running from a storm. She was eating in it. But when Sterling ran downstairs, frantic with a shame he'd never felt before, he found nothing but an empty plastic container. Zahara was gone, and the image of her, broken and wet, was the moment this silent billionaire realized the monster wasn't outside. It was living in his house, and he was next. What happened next sparked a war for his fortune, a journey for revenge, and a stunning secret between the billionaire's son and the maid that tore the Aldridge family apart. Don't click away, because the storm that night wasn't the end of Zahara's story. It was the first page of her empire. Zahara Hayes was 23 years old, and the quiet dignity she carried was the only possession that couldn't be taken from her. She was a woman built of resilience, a fact forged in the fiery crucible of taking care of her younger brother, Elias, who needed specialized medical care that cost more than Zahara could fathom. For the last 4 years, the Aldridge Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been the silent, gilded backdrop to her exhausting life, a stark contrast to the small, mold-scented apartment she called home. She was the maid, the cleaner, the silent observer of a world of excess, and her only focus was the next paycheck. That night, the mansion's polished marble floors felt colder than usual. Serafina Aldridge, the lady of the house, stood over Zahara near the back in trance, her voice a poisonous whisper that could chip stone. Serafina's manicured hand was trembling, not from cold, but from manufactured rage. No more lies, Zahara. I saw you looking at him. You've gotten too comfortable in my home. It was a lie, a jealous projection, but in the Aldridge world, Serafina's lies held the weight of truth. The mansion had always been an arena, and tonight, the champion of cruelty had arrived. Zahara didn't argue. Arguing with Serafina was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. She simply dropped her cleaning cloth, her gaze unwavering. Serafina saw the defiance in her silence, and her eyes narrowed. You're fired. Get out of my house now. And don't you dare set 1 foot on that driveway until I've confirmed your direct deposit is canceled. Serafina held a sheaf of papers, official-looking documents that Zahara recognized with a terrifying pang. It was the latest update from the hospital, outlining Elias's final surgery schedule and the remaining balance. Serafina, with a sneer of pure malice, tore the papers into confetti and let the pieces drift onto the spotless floor. Zahara's breath hitched, not for her job, but for the lost hope those shredded papers represented. Zahara walked to the small utility closet where her few belongings were stored. She packed a worn nylon bag, inside which was a small, half-empty bottle of prescription children's medicine, the last dose of a costly, life-saving drug she had scrimped for months to afford. She refused to look toward the East Wing, where Orion Aldridge, Serafina's stepson, usually worked late. Orion was kind, maybe too kind, and his brief, gentle glances across the dinner table had been the spark Serafina used to ignite this fire. Zahara walked past the kitchen, which was now lit only by the eerie blue glow of the massive industrial fridge. Serafina stopped her one last time, blocking the service door. You want to eat that dinner? Fine, but you won't bring your filth into my kitchen. You'll eat it outside, and don't step 1 foot back onto my marble floors. The threat was clear. A storm hit with brutal, biblical force, turning the sprawling estate into a dark, wind-whipped island. Rain hammered the roof tiles, and the wind screamed like a banshee through the tall oaks. Zahara stepped onto the flagstone service steps, clutching the flimsy container of her last meal, a cold portion of leftover salmon and rice. The storm was a physical manifestation of the despair crushing her chest. She found a small, dark corner beneath the stone overhang, protected only slightly from the driving rain, and sat down on the cold stone. She didn't want to eat, but she knew she had to. She opened the plastic container and started to pick at the cold fish, utterly soaked and shivering, the noise of the storm deafening the silent terror of her uncertain future. This was not just a firing. This was an eviction from hope. The fifth-floor study of the Aldridge mansion was Sterling Aldridge's sanctuary, a fortress of glass, teak, and silent power. Sterling Aldridge, a man in his late 50s whose face was perpetually etched with the concentration of a corporate warlord, rarely noticed anything outside the glow of his stock tickers. He was finalizing the acquisition of a European tech firm, a $3 billion deal that required every molecule of his focus. But the relentless drumming of the torrential rain outside his panoramic window was a distraction even his fierce concentration couldn't drown out. He rubbed his temples and looked up, expecting to see only the black expanse of the stormy night. Instead, through the smeared glass, he saw movement near the delivery entrance far below. At first, he dismissed it as a large animal, perhaps a deer driven by the storm. Then, the glint of a cheap plastic food container caught his eye, reflecting the harsh yellow of a security light. He leaned closer, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar pressure. There, huddled on the stone steps, utterly soaked through, was the small, distinct figure of his maid, Zahara. She was bent over the container, eating, or perhaps just moving, in the blinding, merciless rain. The image hit Sterling with the physical force of a punch, the incongruity of absolute destitution pressed against the backdrop of his unbelievable wealth. He blinked, thinking it was an illusion, a trick of the glass and the light, but she was still there, a monument to silent suffering. Sterling's first impulse was cold, corporate logic. Why is she out there? Who permitted this? He called for Serafina, his voice a low, gravelly command. Serafina swept in, impeccably dressed even at this late hour. Her expression practiced confusion. The maid? Oh, that girl. I fired her, Sterling. I caught her stealing antique silverware. Frankly, she was too insolent. She airily dismissed the firing, never mentioning the rain or her final, cruel instruction. Sterling pointed to the window. Then why is she eating outside in the middle of this hurricane? Serafina shrugged, feigning offense. Perhaps she's making a scene. She was always quite dramatic. She tried to draw his attention back to his deal, to his work, to anything but the window, but the image was fixed in his mind. A knot of icy dread formed in Sterling's gut, something far more unsettling than losing a billion-dollar merger. He felt a sudden, profound sense of shame, a contamination of his pristine world. Without a word, he grabbed his umbrella and bolted from the room, descending the massive, curving staircase 2 steps at a time. He burst through the service door, flinging it open with a force that rattled the glass. The storm instantly swallowed him, drenching his bespoke suit. He squinted through the downpour, searching the small stone alcove where he'd seen her. But she was gone. The only evidence she had ever been there was a small, white plastic food container, upside down and empty, lying on the rain-slicked stone, a silent, damning accusation. The only sound left was the roar of the wind and the blood pounding in his ears. Sterling stood in the storm for another minute, the cold rain grounding him, replacing his corporate calm with a simmering, unfamiliar rage. He stormed back into the house, dripping water onto the very floors Serafina guarded so fiercely. He found her in the main foyer, already on the phone, her voice falsely cheerful. She hung up and turned to him, her smile instantly freezing at the look in his eyes. "Don't you dare lie to me again, Serafina." She wasn't stealing. You told her to eat out there. You humiliated her." His voice was low, controlled, but the sheer force of his fury made the crystal chandelier above them seem to vibrate. Serafina recoiled, surprised by the raw emotion from a man she thought she had completely domesticated into an emotional automaton. She quickly regained her footing. She was disrespectful. "You don't understand these people, Sterling. They need to be kept in their place, or they take advantage." The casual cruelty of her words sliced through the last remnants of his denial about his marriage. The argument escalated, moving from Zahara to their entire empty, transactional life together. Sterling's voice cracked, revealing a deep-seated unhappiness he had buried beneath decades of work. "You haven't been a wife. You've been a public relations manager, and you treated the only genuine person in this house like dirt." As their voices rose, a shadow moved near the corner. It was Orion Aldridge, Sterling's son, looking exhausted and guilt-ridden. He retreated quickly, unable to face the parental war, but a flashback briefly illuminated his quiet struggle. Earlier that day, Orion had tried to slip Zahara an envelope with a small wad of cash. "Just to help with Elias, see. Please." Zahara had placed the money back in his pocket, her expression regretful but firm. "I can't, Orion. Your father pays my salary. I won't take gifts that make me feel indebted." That's how the power is kept uneven. Their relationship was rooted in shared history and deep, unacknowledged respect, but Orion lacked the strength to truly fight his stepmother. Later, sitting alone in the study, Sterling felt a cold, calculated curiosity take hold. He pulled up his company's complex financial dashboard, bypassing the standard household accounts. He looked for anomalies, not theft by Zahara, but something subtler. He tracked the payroll for domestic staff, an insignificant line item in his vast accounts. What he found was chilling. Zahara's salary, though competitive, was being systematically garnished through an administrative loophole. The difference, hundreds of dollars a month for the past 4 years, was routed to a holding corporation. He traced the holding corporation to a shell organization, which ultimately led to Serafina's personal offshore trust. She wasn't just underpaying Zahara. She had been systematically stealing from her to fund her own lavish expenses, a continuous, petty act of financial battery. The discovery of this hidden, cold-blooded fraud turned Sterling's shame into a dangerous resolve. Sterling immediately engaged his personal security detail, not for protection, but for investigation. He instructed the lead investigator, a discreet man named Jensen, to find Zahara. "I need her current address, her brother's details, everything. And do it without drawing the attention of anyone in this house, especially Serafina." The request felt absurd. A billionaire who didn't even know the last name of the woman who had served him coffee for 4 years. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Meanwhile, Orion, pale and shaking from the night's confrontation, sought out Serafina. He cornered her in the conservatory. "You tried to ruin her. You know she needs that job for Elias's surgery." Serafina didn't even flinch. She leaned in, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. "Careful, Orion. Do you remember the little incident you had in college? The one your father's lawyers so elegantly swept under the rug? The one that could still put your entire professional life in jeopardy if, say, an anonymous source decided to call a few old friends in the DA's office." She used her knowledge of his past mistake, his greatest shame, as a weapon, twisting his genuine concern into terrified paralysis. Orion backed away, defeated again, his good intentions crumbling under her threat. Jensen, the private investigator, was fast and efficient. By the next afternoon, he called Sterling with Zahara's location, a neglected, rain-stained apartment complex on the less desirable side of Stanford. Sterling didn't send a driver. He took his own car, an unmarked, older sedan, and drove there himself. The contrast was a physical blow. The luxury and space he took for granted were replaced by cramped, dark hallways smelling of stale food and dampness. He found her apartment unit and knocked, but there was no answer. Through a half-open door next door, he saw a woman watching television with a small, quiet boy on the couch, whose legs were braced and who clutched a worn teddy bear. The neighbor, seeing Sterling's expensive clothes in the drab hallway, looked suspicious. "You looking for Zahara? She ain't here. Took a double shift somewhere else. Gotta work now, you know." For that little one. The little one was Elias Hayes. Sterling looked at the boy, his innocence and vulnerability starkly visible, and felt a flood of terrifying realization about the life Zahara was fighting to save. Sterling waited for over an hour outside Zahara's building. When she finally arrived, she looked exhausted, her posture strained, her dignity only barely concealing the panic of a woman who had nowhere left to turn. Seeing Sterling standing there, out of place in his expensive but damp overcoat, she stopped dead, her initial fear quickly turning to cold, defensive anger. "What do you want, Mr. Aldrich?" "Here to make sure I cleared out every last coffee cup." Sterling cut to the chase, pulling out his business card. "I am here to correct a profound wrong, Zahara. Your termination was unjust. My wife's actions were criminal." He offered a severance package, a truly astronomical sum, enough to pay for Elias's surgery 10 times over and buy Zahara a small house. "Take this. No strings. It's for you and your brother." Zahara took the card, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall. "My worth is not your conscience, sir. I won't be paid for your guilt." Her rejection was quiet but absolute, and it forced Sterling to confront the hollowness of simply throwing money at a problem. Zahara then quietly explained the crushing reality. She was jobless, Elias's surgery was in a week, and the hospital was demanding a significant upfront deposit, which she now had no way to secure. "I've tried every resource. I've asked every church, every charity. I'm out of time." As she spoke, the front door to the building opened, and the landlord, a burly, sweaty man named Sal, emerged, his eyes immediately locking onto Zahara. He swaggered toward her. "Hayes, I heard you got fired from the big house. Your rent is 3 days late. I need that deposit now, or you and the cripple are out on the street by morning." Sal's voice was loud and laced with thinly veiled, casual contempt. He moved as if to push Zahara. In a flash of righteous anger, something he hadn't felt in decades, Sterling stepped between them, his voice suddenly hard and commanding. "Stop. Now." He pulled out his phone, making a single, rapid call to his primary legal counsel. "I'm buying the property, Mark. Close the deal immediately, no price objection. Send someone to inform the current owner that the papers will be served within the hour." He stared the landlord down, his eyes ice cold, the weight of his power instantly shifting the atmosphere. "You're fired, Sal. Pack your things. This building belongs to her now." He looked at Zahara, the shock on her face mirroring his own surprise at the impulsive, definitive action he'd just taken. If you're still enjoying this story, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. Sterling's bold, split-second decision to buy Zahara's entire apartment building sent seismic shockwaves through his pristine life. The cost of the property was insignificant to his net worth, but the act itself was a monumental violation of the cold, unspoken rules of the Aldrich household. Serafina Aldrich, who was used to controlling every dollar spent on anything outside her personal consumption, erupted in a firestorm of fury. The acquisition was instantly flagged by her internal monitors. She didn't care about the building. She cared that Sterling had spent money without her permission and for the maid. Using a highly detailed and often ignored clause in their prenuptial agreement regarding unilateral, non-business-related real estate transfers, Serafina quickly moved to freeze a massive chunk of Sterling's liquid assets. She demanded he immediately sell the low-income property, claiming he was acting irrationally and potentially compromising their shared estate. Her actions were swift, tactical, and designed to punish his sudden, unpredictable conscience. The legal maneuver forced Sterling to slow down. He couldn't just throw money at Zahara. He needed a formal structure. He approached her the next day, not in the tone of a boss, but as a potential business partner. He offered her a high-paying, remote administrative role, a safe harbor for her and Elias. Zahara listened patiently, but her principles remained unshakable. "I don't need charity disguised as employment, Mr. Aldridge. I need a real job with a real title and real responsibility, where I earn my salary," she stated simply. "I'll draft a contract for your foundation. I just need fair treatment." Sterling was deeply impressed by her refusal to be bought or pitted. Her quiet demand for fairness was a lesson in self-respect he had never encountered in his world. He realized he wasn't hiring a former maid. He was partnering with a woman of iron integrity. Hidden in the shadows of the mansion, someone else was watching the chaos. Orion Aldridge, paralyzed by his stepmother's past threats and tortured by his own cowardice, knew he had to act. He had watched Zahara suffer for years and knew she was the only decent thing his father had ever cared about besides his business. Late that night, Orion accessed his limited corporate credentials and dove into the deep archives of his father's holding company, looking for dirt on Serafina. He found it. Evidence of Serafina using the company credit cards for years of personal luxury purchases she had misclassified as business expenses. It wasn't the total scope of her crimes, but it was enough. Orion, shaking with fear, anonymously packaged the initial evidence and sent it to Sterling's primary legal counsel, igniting the fuse on a corporate investigation that was certain to explode his family. The slow burn of justice had begun, set in motion by the very man who feared it most. Orion's hesitant act, the anonymous leak of Serafina's early financial manipulations, was a crack that allowed sunlight into the darkness. Sterling's legal team immediately recognized the severity of the initial findings. What started as an effort to counter Serafina's prenup claims quickly ballooned into a full-scale corporate investigation. They began subpoenaing documents and locking down digital trails, trying to understand the full scope of Serafina's theft from the Aldridge coffers. The tension in the mansion became thick and unbearable, a silent war where both Sterling and Serafina knew the end was approaching, but neither knew exactly how catastrophic it would be. Sterling finally realized the emotional and financial cost of his years of negligence and blindness. Meanwhile, Zahara focused relentlessly on the future. She enrolled in a fast-track course to secure her executive assistant certification, determined to prove her competence for the role Sterling offered. Sterling often stopped by her new, foundation-provided small office, not to check on her work, but just to talk. Their conversations moved past business and into philosophy. One afternoon, Sterling spoke of the billions he had amassed. Zahara, looking up from her textbook, responded thoughtfully. "True wealth isn't the pile you sit on, Mr. Aldridge. It's what you build for others when you don't have to. It's about integrity, not inventory." The remark struck him deeply, guiding his transition from a moneymaker to a potential philanthropist. He was learning more about integrity from his former maid than he had in 30 years on Wall Street. Serafina, however, was not only aware of the escalating investigation, but was actively panicking. She correctly deduced that Orion or Sterling was behind the inquiries. Unable to strike at Sterling directly due to the frozen assets, she turned her venom back on Zahara, the source of all the trouble. In a final, desperate, and horrifying act of malice, Serafina used a burner phone and a complex VPN network to call Elias's hospital. She fabricated a story about a massive fraud and claimed Zahara's insurance coverage for the critical surgery was voided due to false claims. The hospital, bound by protocol and fear of liability, immediately flagged the account for review, nearly canceling the life-saving procedure just hours before Elias was scheduled to go under the knife. Serafina smiled, believing she had destroyed Zahara's hope forever. The hospital called Zahara hours before dawn. Ms. Hayes, we regret to inform you the procedure is on hold due to a critical irregularity with your coverage. The cold, impersonal words hit Zahara like a physical blow. Her heart plummeted, instantly replacing the quiet hope she had just found with cold, absolute terror. Elias was already prepped for surgery. The clock had run out. She felt the despair wash over her, a massive tidal wave threatening to drown her and Elias. This wasn't bad luck. This was targeted, precise cruelty. She knew, instantly, that Serafina was behind it. Zahara's voice was ragged with panic as she called Sterling, her composure finally shattered. "It's the surgery, Mr. Aldrich. They've stopped it. I think she called them." Sterling was out the door and speeding toward the city within minutes. He didn't waste time on lawyers or calls. He walked into the hospital administrative office, bypassed the receptionist, and walked straight into the CEO's glass office. The CEO, who had previously dismissed Sterling as just another wealthy donor, was suddenly confronted by the full, unfiltered power of a man fighting for more than money. Sterling didn't shout. He just spoke with the calm finality of an ultimatum. "My name is Sterling Aldrich. I guarantee all costs. Every dollar. You will reverse the cancellation now and notify me of the exact moment the surgery is completed. Failure to comply will result in a professional and financial reckoning that you cannot fathom." Sterling's personal intervention, using his influence and reputation as leverage, not just a check, forced the hospital administration to immediately reverse the flag. Elias was rushed into the operating room. Sterling sat with Zahara in the waiting room, finally realizing the true purpose of his wealth, to act as a shield for those who had none. The wait was agonizing, but eventually the surgeon emerged. Success. He did wonderfully. The relief that washed over Zahara was blinding. As the immediate crisis subsided, Sterling spoke with the hospital's security team about the anonymous, fraudulent call. The security chief, intimidated by Sterling's presence, reluctantly admitted they had traced the call's original IP address before the VPN mask was applied. "Sir, the original connection was routed through a very specific, high-end private network server. It appears to be located somewhere on the Aldrich estate property." The words hung in the air, damning and absolute. Serafina hadn't just sabotaged the surgery. She had done it from her own home. Zahara looked at Sterling, and they both knew the gloves were now officially off. Zahara didn't wait. After confirming Elias was stable, she drove straight back to the mansion. She found Serafina in the immaculate dining room, calmly sketching plans for a new charity ball. Zahara walked straight to her, her steps echoing on the marble. She didn't raise her voice. Her quiet, contained fury was far more terrifying than any scream. "The IP address, Serafina. It leads back here. You try to stop Elias's surgery." Serafina laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. She placed her expensive pencil down. "And if I did, what of it? He is your responsibility, not ours. You should have been more careful. You should have known your place." She was arrogant, confident that her legal status and Sterling's name would forever protect her. Serafina's admission, fueled by her absolute belief in her untouchability, was the final, undeniable confirmation Zahara needed. Later that same day, Sterling sought out Zahara, finding her in the foundation office, organizing the files for Elias's new physical therapy schedule. He sat opposite her, looking weary and defeated despite his victory at the hospital. He didn't talk about the divorce or the money. He talked about his son, Orion. "I have failed him," Sterling confessed, his voice rough. "I was so consumed by my empire that I didn't see Serafina's constant emotional abuse. I neglected him, and that neglect allowed her to keep him paralyzed with guilt. I was blind, Zahara. You seeing me as a human being has shown me my own failings." It was a moment of true, unvarnished vulnerability for the corporate titan, a quiet acknowledgement of his past moral blindness that cemented the unusual trust growing between them. But the quiet moment was shattered by a frantic call from Sterling's legal team. The corporate investigation, which had started with simple expense account fraud, had unearthed a monstrous, far-reaching scheme. Serafina wasn't just skimming money. She had collaborated with foreign contacts to set up massive, multi-million-dollar tax evasion schemes over the last decade. The operation was brilliant, complex, and horrifyingly successful. The kicker: Sterling's name was on the initial paperwork. Serafina had made him an unwitting co-conspirator, leveraging his signature on routine documents. The discovery meant Serafina was facing federal charges, but it also meant Sterling's entire empire and his personal freedom were now at risk. The investigation had exposed a viper in his home, and now its venom was threatening to take down his entire world. There was no hesitation left in Sterling. The exposure of the tax evasion scheme was the final line crossed. He filed for immediate divorce and full legal separation, using the tax evasion evidence as irrefutable proof of her malicious intent. The paperwork was served on Serafina within hours, coupled with an ironclad injunction that immediately barred her from the mansion, company property, and any access to corporate funds. Sterling, now operating with ruthless efficiency, used his leverage to ensure Serafina was professionally and socially exiled before the news broke. He forced her resignation from every charitable board and company affiliation she held. The house, the empire, and the reputation that had been her entire identity were collapsing around her in a single, brutal afternoon. In the midst of the legal turmoil, Sterling formalized his commitment to change. He officially launched the Aldrich Foundation for Accessible Care and, with an unprecedented move, elevated Zahara to an executive role, director of operations. She wasn't an assistant. She was building the foundation from the ground up, using her intimate, painful knowledge of the system's failings to ensure the funds actually helped people. Zahara now had power, a platform, and a salary that would secure Elias's care for life. She had traded her cleaning uniform for a boardroom chair, a testament to her quiet strength and Sterling's newfound respect for merit over privilege. This moment of empowerment was a ray of light in the deepening darkness of the Aldrich family implosion. Serafina, disgraced and exiled, was driven by pure, toxic spite. She knew she couldn't hurt Sterling's business now, but she could destroy the one person who carried his name, Orion. In a final, desperate act of bitter revenge, Serafina reached out to a notorious gossip journalist she had once cultivated. She provided the journalist with the suppressed, deeply personal, and career-ending details of Orion's past college incident that she had used to blackmail him for years. The story dropped like a bomb on every major news outlet, painted as a tell-all from an insider. Orion's fledgling business venture, which he had just started independently, instantly evaporated. His reputation was ruined, his career destroyed, and he was publicly disgraced, a casualty of his stepmother's final, poisonous attack. The billionaire's family had imploded, and the innocent son was left completely broken. If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. Serafina's cruel public exposure of Orion Aldrich was a devastating blow, far more ruinous than any financial loss. The fallout was immediate. His fledgling ethical investment company, built on the promise of his integrity, evaporated overnight. He was radioactive, publicly condemned, and humiliated. Orion, stripped of his business, his father's support, and any hope of a future, finally broke. He showed up at the Foundation's office, not to see Sterling, but Zahara. He confessed everything. The years of Serafina's calculated emotional abuse, the constant erosion of his self-worth, and the reason he had been unable to act sooner. He revealed the dark secret of their shared past, a brief, genuine young love between him and Zahara, which Serafina had violently extinguished with threats against Zahara's job and Elias's stability years ago. His paralysis had been rooted in fear for her, and now that fear had destroyed him anyway. Zahara listened, her face unreadable. The confession hurt, not because of the old romance, but because of the years of quiet suffering he had endured and the cowardice that had kept him silent while she struggled. She felt pity, but tempered with a sharp disappointment in his weakness. Yet, seeing him so utterly shattered, she found the empathy that Sterling had taught her to value. She didn't offer a job or money, but a path. You let her define you, Orion. We can't change the past, but we can change the story of your future. Start small. Volunteer here. No cameras, no fanfare. Rebuild your life on your own terms. It was a lifeline built on respect, not pity. Serafina was not done. Even without access to the company, she launched a high-stakes, ruthless legal campaign, claiming her right to half of Sterling's non-business assets, including his personal retirement funds and a massive stake in his original tech company. Her goal was clear: to leave him financially crippled and to personally dismantle the foundation he was building with Zahara. She filed motion after motion, demanding endless disclosures and dragging Sterling through a poisonous legal battle that threatened to consume every remaining resource and bring his life's work to a screeching halt. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the destruction of legacy. The legal proceedings between Sterling and Serafina exploded into a toxic, media-fueled circus. Serafina's legal team was brutal. They dug up every detail, twisting the initial Maid in the Rain incident into a narrative of Sterling's infatuation and Zahara's manipulation. They painted Zahara not as a victim of injustice, but as a cunning employee who had used her position and the incident to fleece a vulnerable, aging billionaire. Headlines screamed of betrayal and deceit, dragging Zahara's name through the mud and threatening the credibility of the fledgling Aldrich Foundation. Sterling's team fought back, but the public relations battle was fierce. Zahara stepped forward, not as a witness who was legally compelled to speak, but as the face of the foundation. She appeared in carefully managed press conferences, speaking calmly and factually about the need for accessible health care, using Serafina's financial crimes as a direct contrast to the Foundation's mission. Her composure and quiet authority successfully countered the negative narratives, allowing the public to see her as a credible executive, not a sensationalized mistress. Her powerful public presence became Sterling's greatest asset, shifting the focus from the scandal to the good the Foundation was already achieving. During a particularly intense discovery phase, the worst happened. A crucial piece of evidence, a complete, physical financial ledger detailing Serafina's full decade of international tax evasion and fraud, was stolen from Sterling's lawyer's locked office. Without this primary document, the tax evasion case against Serafina was severely weakened, potentially allowing her to escape criminal prosecution and win a massive settlement in the divorce. Sterling was horrified, realizing the theft had to be an inside job, signaling that Serafina still had spies in his network. The theft threatened to completely derail his attempt to achieve justice. The scales of justice suddenly tipped back in the direction of the villain. The theft of the physical ledger was a masterful, desperate move that left Sterling reeling. Realizing he had been outmaneuvered by Serafina's ruthless network, Sterling was forced to play an extreme, high-risk card. In a dramatic court hearing, he revealed a fail-safe measure Serafina was unaware of: a digitally encrypted, cloud-based copy of a ledger, hosted on a server in a neutral country, requiring multiple biometric keys for access. He explained that he had implemented this kill switch years ago, sensing Serafina's dishonesty, a contingency he never thought he'd use. The revelation stunned Serafina's legal team, who had banked on the destruction of the physical evidence. The courtroom exploded into chaos. In a moment of quiet reflection before the next court date, Zahara and Sterling sat together, overlooking the city skyline from the Foundation's new temporary office space. Zahara asked him a direct, profound question. When all this is over, Mr. Aldridge, what do you want her name to mean? Billionaire who won a divorce? Or the man who chose to do the right thing when it cost him everything? It was a final, critical challenge to his integrity. Sterling looked at her, truly seeing the depth of her moral compass, and acknowledged that the empire he built was meaningless compared to the legacy of kindness she was helping him create. Cornered and facing overwhelming evidence of a conspiracy, Serafina made one final, panicked mistake. She attempted to secretly board a private jet at a small regional airport, planning to flee to a country without an extradition treaty with the U.S. But the federal warrants for tax evasion, triggered by Sterling's digital evidence, were already active. Her passport was flagged. Just moments before the jet could take off, federal agents swarmed the tarmac. Serafina Aldridge, the socialite, was detained on the runway. Her desperate attempt to escape had only sealed her fate and confirmed her guilt to the world. The detention of Serafina at the airport was a global media spectacle, marking the definitive, humiliating end of her reign. She was publicly disgraced, facing serious federal and state charges that promised years of litigation and incarceration. The divorce was finalized swiftly, with the prenuptial agreement holding firm and Sterling's fortune and company assets protected. Justice, delayed and hard-won, had finally prevailed, thanks to Sterling's moral awakening and Zahara's unshakable principles. Zahara's focus immediately shifted from the courtroom to the community. She oversaw the opening of the Foundation's first major initiative, a state-of-the-art medical clinic offering subsidized care in a previously underserved neighborhood. In a moving, simple ceremony, Sterling announced the clinic would be named the Elias Hayes Center, a permanent tribute to Zahara's little brother and the catalyst for Sterling's transformation. Zahara, now officially the Foundation's executive director, stood at the podium, a former maid, now an architect of profound systemic change, using her experience to uplift others. In a move that shocked the financial world, Sterling made the ultimate sacrifice for his new path. He formally stepped down as the CEO of his massive, influential tech company. He announced he was selling the majority of his remaining corporate shares and dedicating the rest of his life and wealth entirely to philanthropy. He gave up his identity as a billionaire and embraced his new role as a mentor and humanitarian, specifically empowering young leaders like Zahara. His transformation was complete. He chose integrity over empire. The man who once lived for the next deal was now living for the next community center. In a final, powerful moment of resolution, Orion, clean, sober, and genuinely humbled, made a surprise public appearance. Having worked for months in the background doing real community outreach, he stood beside Zahara at a Foundation event. He was no longer the conflicted, paralyzed stepson, but a dedicated advocate. Zahara announced that Orion would be heading the Foundation's national outreach program, working alongside her. Their relationship was now one of pure professional respect and shared purpose, a stronger bond than the fragile romance they had once shared. They were partners in building a new legacy, forging a powerful, balanced team. Years passed. Zahara, now in her late 20s and the Foundation's CEO designate, stood on the balcony of the organization's towering headquarters, a beacon of hope she helped design. She watched a soft, gentle rain fall over the city. She quietly reflected on the night of the storm, realizing that Serafina's cruelty, forcing her to eat in the rain, was not the end of her hope, but the necessary, painful beginning of her power. The tears she had cried were now the foundation for thousands of lives saved. A junior staff member brought her a piece of mail. It was a crisp, impersonal white envelope, postmarked from a low-security correctional facility. Zahara recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Serafina Aldridge. It was not an apology. It was a final, toxic confession. You won, Zahara. But the only thing I truly regret is that my cruelty allowed Sterling to find a real purpose and you, to achieve real power. You were always just supposed to clean up our messes. Zahara smiled, a slow, powerful, confident smile. She tore the letter into small pieces, dropping the confetti of the past into a waste bin. She adjusted the blazer on her shoulders and walked into a waiting board meeting, now stepping into her role as the CEO designate, the billionaire's former maid, who had become the architect of his greatest legacy. Subscribe and ring the bell. You just watched the story of a storm that washed away a kingdom and ushered in a queen. What sacrifice would you make to change your destiny? Let us know in the comments below. Don't miss our next viral story. Hit that subscribe button now